Good evening all and welcome. I need to give you all a trigger warning. Tonight's stories obviously involve a lot of very sensitive topics. People losing their lives or perhaps even taking their own. So if you are easily triggered, might be best to avoid this one. Don't forget that if you'd like to get 70% off my Patreon, the sale ends on the 14th. Follow the links down below to find out more. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My platoon and I were dispatched to a medical call for an unresponsive 6-month-old, not breathing and without a pulse. Even among all the emergencies we'd handled, infant calls sit in a different category. But the moment we stepped through the door, that knot tightened. The father stood in the living room with another small child at his side, and something about him immediately felt wrong. He was neither panicked nor frantic. He wasn't crying, he just hovered there with this detached, almost robotic calm. He told us he put the infant down for a nap, began cooking dinner, and when he checked again the baby was unresponsive, so he called the emergency number. His voice never wavered or cracked, like it was a rehearsed story. We scooped the baby up and started working instantly. Compressions, airway, the whole thing. When everyone knows the odds are already stacked against you. We kept it going the entire way to the hospital, but deep down all of us felt it. There was more here, something wasn't lining up. The ER staff confirmed it almost immediately, and within minutes of transferring care, one of the nurses came out with this look, the kind that says everything without a single word. The baby had multiple broken bones, some recent, some older, some in different stages of healing. There were internal organ injuries, bruising on the brain, signs of trauma that had happened not once, not twice, but over and over again. This was no accident. It was a pattern. Later, investigators pieced together the rest. The father would lose his temper while playing video games and turn that rage towards his infant. The mother knew. She'd known for a while but never tried to stop it, or called for help, or removed the baby from danger. She just let it happen. The level of indifference from both parents is something I still can't wrap my head around. The baby fought for 3 days in intensive care before finally passing away. And when the parents were arrested and charged with murder, the father showed no remorse, no confusion, no fear. He acted like the entire situation was nothing more than an inconvenience, like he was annoyed more than anything else. I spoke with the judge assigned to the case afterwards. He told me he'd reviewed every report, every photo, and every single detail the investigators uncovered. He'd been on the bench for decades and had handled some truly horrific cases. But he said this one was the worst call he'd received in his entire career. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Go home and hug your kids tonight." I did, and that night holding them felt different. My old history professor once told our class a story about her cousin, a veteran police officer who'd seen just about everything in her career in law enforcement. A few Halloweens ago, her cousin was dispatched to a pretty standard call at one apartment complex, a noise complaint about a rowdy costume party on one of the upper floors. Halloween always means noise, and drunken arguments about who stole what, etc. So he figured he'd go up there and tell everyone to keep it down, and head back out within 15 minutes. He pulled into the complex near midnight. The courtyard was full of the usual holiday leftovers, plastic cups and fake cobwebs and streamers fluttering from the balcony. He stepped out of his patrol car, took a breath, and started towards the building's entrance when he saw it. A sudden blur of movement dropped past the upper floors. It was too fast to fully register and too large to be anything but a person. And a split second later came a wet, conclusive smack that echoed across the courtyard. He said the sound was so jarring and so unmistakable that it cut straight through him. He sprinted towards where the noise had come from. When he reached the patch of grass near the playground, he found the body. A man lay crumpled on his back, having fallen at least 9 stories. The fall had been catastrophic. He landed head first, and the upper portion of his skull had burst outwards on impact, scattering bone and tissue across the lawn in a way that barely seemed real. The lower half of his face, jaw, mouth, and parts of the cheek, was still attached but had been driven so violently downwards that it collapsed into his own chest. His neck was snapped in multiple places, twisted and bent at impossible angles. My professor said her cousin struggled to find the right words to describe it because broken didn't cover the sheer violence of what the fall had done to him. And then there was the part that made it even more surreal. He was dressed as a medieval knight, helmet, breastplate, bits of armor strapped over a dark tunic. At a first glance, her cousin genuinely thought he was looking at a Halloween prop or a mannequin someone had thrown from a balcony as a dumb holiday prank. The armor was dented from the impact, and the way it reflected the patrol car's lights didn't look like something that could belong to a living person. But then the details came into focus. He could see the blood pooling beneath him, the ruined anatomy, the way the body had folded on itself. It was no mannequin or prop. It was certainly a man. The initial belief was that someone had pushed him or that he had jumped. But once more units arrived and the scene was secured, the truth came out quickly. The partygoers upstairs, many of them still half drunk and shaken, told officers that the man had stepped out onto a narrow ledge outside the apartment window to smoke a cigarette. He'd been drinking heavily all night, stumbling and laughing and bragging about how the armor made him invincible. Someone even tried to convince him to come back inside, but he waved them off. One slip was all it took. My professor's cousin said it was one of the few scenes that haunted him, not because it was the most violent thing he'd ever responded to, but because of how surreal it felt. The costume, the late hour, the music that was still thumping faintly from the party above. It got to him. I was part of a detachment in a city of roughly 250,000 people. Big enough that violent calls weren't unusual, but small enough that every serious incident rippled through the community. One afternoon, I was in the office chatting with my corporal when we overheard a radio call about a stabbing. Nothing alarming at first. In our city, stabbing could mean anything from a minor scuffle to a drunken misunderstanding involving a kitchen knife. But before we could even exchange the familiar, "it's probably nothing" look, a second call came through, and then a tone alert hit. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. This wasn't minor, it was the real thing. We bolted from the office, heading straight for our patrol cars, and out of habit and stupidity, we took the elevator. It felt like being trapped in a metal coffin while the world burned outside. When the doors finally dragged open, we sprinted to our vehicles. I tore out of the parade and hit the streets fast, bracing for the usual nightmare of gridlock traffic and drivers who treated sirens like a mild suggestion. But on that day, the roads opened up like Moses parting the Red Sea. No one ignoring the lights and sirens. And because of that strange stroke of luck, I ended up being the second car on the scene despite being one of the last to leave the office. As I rounded a corner towards a major intersection by the mall, the officer in front of me slammed on their brakes. I swerved so hard to avoid hitting them and ended up stopping beside them. And that's when I saw him. A man, standing dead center in the chaotic intersection, yelling incoherently and waving something in his hand. At first glance, it looked like he was flagging us down, maybe desperate or injured, but then the light hit the metal, and we realized what he was holding was actually a large knife. Instinct kicked in. We drew immediately and began shouting commands, telling him in English and French to drop the weapon. By now, more units were arriving, pulling up from every direction, and within seconds the intersection was a wall of uniform and patrol cars. A dozen officers had their guns out, forming a perimeter around the man who kept shouting back at us in French. The scene was pure chaos. People were everywhere, shoppers, commuters, parents with kids, all frozen and scrambling for cover. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, and the noise bounced off the buildings in this confusing echo of commands, scream, and traffic. The situation then got worse. An elderly woman who had been trying to cross the street was startled by all the shouting. She stepped back, lost her balance, and fell off the curb, striking her head on the pavement. And that exact moment, as if triggered by the sudden commotion, the suspect lunged towards us. I thought for sure he was going to charge. Instead, he stopped abruptly, raised the knife to his own arm, and slashed. That momentary hesitation was the window we needed. We surged forwards, tackled him, disarmed him, and dragged him out the street. His wound was bad, arterial spray bright and fast, so I threw on 2 tourniquets while another officer helped secure him. Once stabilized, we transported him to the hospital and handed him over to the serious crime detectives. There was this collective feeling of adrenaline and shaky relief that we had acted fast and that our timing had prevented something terrible. But the relief didn't last. Minutes later, we learnt the truth. Before we even arrived, the suspect had already attacked multiple people. He had stormed the public library, specifically targeting women. A young woman in her mid-20s, a student, fled into a restroom to escape him, but he followed her inside and fatally stabbed her. A teacher had been stabbed in the eye and needed emergency surgery, and several bystanders had been slashed while trying to run. Our intervention hadn't stopped him before things turned deadly. We had arrived after the worst had already happened. The suspect later claimed mental illness in court and refused to speak French or English, dragging proceedings out for months. Eventually, he broke the silence, admitted what he'd done, apologized, and received a life sentence with no chance of parole for 15 years. But none of that will bring her back. I'll never forget the crushing feeling of thinking we'd prevented a massacre, only to find out we were already too late. That young woman will never finish her education, never build the life she was working towards. Her family will never see who she'll become, and all because a man chose violence and refused to take responsibility, blaming his past, his addictions, anything but himself. At the end of the day, your choices are your own, and you own every last one of them. People should try and remember that. I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes. I was always told stories when I was a new officer that there was a doctor who used to live in one of these homes. The story goes, the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself. He numbed his stomach area to make an incision on himself, but since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally cut far too deep and large, and accidentally disemboweled himself. When officers and paramedics arrive, he was found barely alive, holding his own intestines, and ultimately died. Fast forward, I was assigned a call about a young female who was found dead by her older sister. When I arrive on scene, it is in the aforementioned nice neighborhood. When I exited my vehicle, I immediately had an uneasy feeling about the house. While nice on the outside, it just had bad energy surrounding it, and as I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt wrong. When I was let inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told the deceased sister, Emily, was in the basement. At this point, another officer had arrived as well, and stayed upstairs with the family as I entered the basement. The basement was unfinished and was fairly dark, minus 2 pull-string lights on each side of the basement. The scene in the basement was similar to that of the front porch. Energy drink cans were everywhere, and another Ouija board was on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19, was hanging by her neck on a basement rafter. She had hung herself with an exercise band and was swinging back and forth slightly. Her face was blue, bloated, and contorted into a horrible expression. Another officer helped me lift her and bring her down. Emily's family consisted of her parents and her older sister. Her parents stated that they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was drink the energy drinks and stay up at all hours of the night playing on the Ouija board. Her sister gave a little more detail about it. Being sisters, she stated that they were very close and told each other everything. Her older sister said Emily indeed had been obsessed with the Ouija board, drinking energy drinks and staying up all night to speak with it. She believed she was speaking to her boyfriend who was dead. And her sister stated Emily had been saying that her boyfriend was begging for her to come join him in the afterlife. And so she believed him. And that's why she did that. Now let me reiterate. This house felt wrong. Everything felt bad. And I had a very uneasy, sick feeling being in that basement. And not because of the dead body, as it wasn't my first. This is a call that really messed me up for a while. We never got much more explanation, and as a cop, you kind of just have to move on with the next call. 2 weeks later, to the day, I get a call about a car accident with ejection. I head to call code 1, lights and sirens, and arrive to find a convertible BMW with the top down, which had experienced an obvious, horrible crash and rollover. It was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman who'd clearly broken her neck as her head twisted almost all the way round. Next to the vehicle, about 25 feet away, was a man who'd been ejected. Keep in mind this was a convertible, so he was ejected from the top of the car. He was missing the entire top half of his head, and there were pieces of brain matter everywhere. I went to close the scene off with yellow tape. I walk about 75 yards away from the accident where I found yet another large chunk of his brain. I'm trying not to be intentionally graphic, but I want to paint the picture just how bad and violent this car accident was. Upon obtaining the man's ID, I read the information off to dispatch, and then another officer and I both realize the same thing at the same time. These two people were Emily's parents, who 2 weeks to the day just died in a horrible way. Breaking the news to the older sister was heartbreaking. I had kept touch with her for a little while. She had inherited her parents' estate and all of their life insurance money, etc., and ended up selling off everything and buying a different house and trying to start over and repair her broken life. However, it doesn't end there. Around a month later, another officer was called after a pedestrian was struck by a car while she was jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it. It was the sister. She managed to survive several weeks in a coma and ultimately did not make it out. If you're wondering why this story about the doctor is relevant, the house that Emily killed herself in was the same house the doctor lived in. I don't know what you guys think, but to me it definitely seems like that house is either cursed or Emily opened up something bad. That was a few years ago now, and I'm no longer a police officer. I moved a few states away now, twice, and have found 2 different Ouija board planchettes on the sidewalk while going to check my mail. I never touch them, and usually use a stick or something to push them into the storm drain. I got dispatched to a welfare check on an older man who lived alone at the very edge of a rural neighborhood. One of his neighbors had called it in, saying no one had seen him in weeks. There were no lights on at night, and the mail was piling up to the point it was spilling out of the box. His garbage cans hadn't moved even once during the entire night. As you can imagine, the classic red flags. When I arrived, I knocked several times, calling his name and listening for any movement inside, but of course I didn't receive any. Every window I could see was covered from the inside with sheets and blankets, pinned tightly so that not a sliver of light from outside could go through. It looked like he was almost trying to seal himself off from the world, or perhaps someone had done it for him. After checking all the doors and still getting no response, I was cleared for forced entry. The front door pushed inwards only halfway before jamming hard on something. I had to shove my shoulder into it, slowly working it open just enough to squeeze through the gap. The living room was dim and stale. You could tell the air hadn't moved in days, and stuff was scattered everywhere. There were stacks of old magazines, used tissues, an empty oxygen tank lying on its side, and several plastic water bottles filled with what appeared to be piss. That was my first real indication that something here was seriously wrong. There wasn't the smell of decomposition you'd expect in a worst-case scenario, but the air felt almost chemically, and I moved further inside, calling out again as I checked each room. Down the narrow hallway, something stopped me in my tracks. 2 basic plastic lawn chairs sat side by side, positioned perfectly straight, facing the closed bedroom door at the very end. They stood out immediately because they weren't dusty or cluttered over like everything else in the house. Someone had been using them recently. Very recently. When I reached the bedroom, I pushed the door open slowly. That's when the old man suddenly sat bolt upright in bed. He was frail, sunken cheeks, patchy grey stubble, and huge dark wraparound glasses that covered almost half his face. He had a baseball cap pulled down so low it shadowed the rest of his features. His skin was a sickly yellow tone, lips cracked and dry. He stared in my direction, but there was no recognition or reaction beyond a slow blink. His eyes moved in short, confused little darts, like he wasn't fully aware of his surroundings. I asked if he was alright, but he didn't answer. He barely seemed capable of forming words. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they immediately exchanged looks. They recognized the symptoms: severe dehydration and malnourishment, the telltale signs of long-term chemical exposure. They mentioned he had likely been inhaling or ingesting something toxic over a period of time, fumes, vapors, or substances he wasn't supposed to be around in any capacity. Once they got him onto the stretcher, one of the paramedics leaned close and quietly told me that if the call had come even a day later, the man would probably be dead. After they took him to the hospital, I finished sweeping the house. That's when I noticed something I had missed earlier. The back patio door, barely visible behind a heavy curtain, was unlocked. The dust on the floor around it told a clear story. Fresh footprints going from the patio door into the hallway, then looping back out again. Someone had been coming in and out. Outside, the yard had more clues. A cluster of cigarette butts near the deck, none of them matching anything inside, and a can of starter fluid shoved halfway beneath the boards. The neighbor later confirmed the man didn't smoke and never had. Later at the hospital, a nurse told me what they found in his blood work, a mix of toxic chemicals commonly associated with people cooking certain illicit substances, enough exposure to cause organ failure over time, certainly enough to make him collapse. And he absolutely did not have the physical ability to set up or maintain anything like that himself, as he could barely lift his own head. That meant only one thing. Someone else had been inside his home, using his space and using those 2 chairs, running whatever they were running just down the hall while he was laying helpless in the next room, slowly being poisoned by the fumes creeping under his door. The neighbor later asked if the old man was going to recover. I told her the truth. He might survive the poisoning, but only just. The 2 chairs in the hallway weren't pointing towards the bedroom door by coincidence. They were arranged like someone had been sitting there deliberately, keeping watch on him, making sure he stayed in that room, and that he didn't call for help. And based on the timeline in his blood work, whoever had been using that house long enough for the exposure to start shutting down his body had turned his home into their workspace, and they didn't care if he lived or died, so long as he stayed out of their way. My cousin spent over 20 years in law enforcement, mostly in rural districts where officers ended up handling things no one's really prepared for. She was one of those people who never dramatized anything. If something messed her up, you knew it had to be genuinely bad. The incident that finally ended her career happened about a decade ago. And even now, my family still dances around the details because of how it affected her. One afternoon, she and several officers were dispatched to a crowded restaurant downtown. Dispatch had already confirmed it a dozen times over the radio. Yes, the call was coming from the restaurant manager, and yes, a uniformed officer on scene had verified it. The man causing the disturbance was very real and very much escalating. By the time my cousin got there, the guy had drenched himself in gasoline. He was pacing between tables, rambling about making everyone watch and holding a lighter to his trembling hand. Each time an officer tried to get close, he'd flick the wheel just enough to send sparks flying. The restaurant had cleared out except for staff hiding in the kitchen, and all the windows and doors were open to vent the fumes. But the smell was still overpowering. For almost 2 hours they tried everything: negotiation, distraction, even bringing in someone who knew him personally, but nothing worked. My cousin said the guy's eyes didn't focus on anyone long enough to feel like he was really hearing them. It was as if he was stuck in some loop of panic, and certainly pacing, dripping gasoline and muttering to himself. Just when the team decided they had an opening to rush him, he stopped moving. My cousin said he gave this strange, almost peaceful sigh. It was the first calm gesture he'd made, and then he flicked the lighter. The extinguisher closest to them jammed, the backup one failed. She had to stand there and watch the entire horror play out, while another officer ran back to the patrol car for equipment that was too far to matter anymore. Even after the flames were out, the smell was stuck to the walls, the uniform and their hair. She said it clung to her skin for days, no matter how many showers she took. That moment was the line she couldn't cross back over. She tried to stay in the department, but the nightmares and panic attacks kept piling up. Eventually, a department psychologist told her she needed inpatient treatment for a while. When she finally stabilized, she refused to go back to active duty. She took a government admin job instead, which was boring and safe, which was exactly what she needed. She calls the man from the restaurant the roasted marshmallow. It almost sounded cruel, but she uses humor the way people use a shield. She writes poems about him now, scattered lines of dark imagery. My family thinks the poems help her get it out of her system. I think the real takeaway is that if something goes terribly wrong in certain police departments, you won't get the support you think you will. And sometimes the thing that destroys you on the job isn't violence aimed at you, but being forced to watch someone else's hell with no way to pull them out of it. This is one story I don't have an explanation for. I don't tell this one at work, and I never made it into a report. But every time someone asks if I've ever seen something paranormal on duty, this story comes to the forefront of my mind. It happened during my first year on the job. I was on a solo footpost at night. My partner was on his meal break, and the streets were dead quiet, and I had about an hour to myself. I decided to walk the length of my post, heading south past a couple of abandoned lots. These lots are usually full of people using, sleeping, or doing whatever they don't want us seeing, so no surprises there. As I passed one of the wilder lots, I thought I saw movement near the back fence, just a shape, not even clearly a person. So I hit it with the flashlight. Nothing. I figured it was just the terrible light playing tricks on me. I turned to keep walking when the chain link fence at the far end rattled loud and sharp, like someone had grabbed it with both hands. I swung my light back, and now there was a man standing there, who was tall with clean clothes and standing perfectly still. He wasn't homeless, and not someone sleeping in the lot, not someone tweaking. He wasn't looking at me either. His eyes were tilted slightly upwards, like he was focused on a point behind me, above me, maybe even past me. I called out, but he didn't answer. He didn't even blink. So I called out again, and again received nothing. It wasn't fear on his face, it was confusion. It was blank, like he wasn't all the way here. I put it over the radio to get him. I had to hop a small fence. I kept my flashlight on him the entire time until I took my eyes off him for literally 2 seconds to get my footing. 2 seconds. And when I looked back up, he was gone. Not walking away or crouched or running, but gone. I froze. That lot is empty, with no cars or sheds or structures to hide behind. The far fence is tall and old. If he climbed it, it would have shaken and rattled like hell again. But there was nothing. Not a sound. I checked the whole lot. Behind the dumpster, inside the dumpster, along the perimeter, even the shadows by the overgrown corner, but there was nothing. The man didn't run, climb, or hide. He just wasn't there anymore. Central asked for a status. I cleared it and walked out of that lot feeling like the air had changed behind me. But here's the part that really messed with me. A week later, I was on the same post with my partner. We were talking to an older guy who's lived in the area forever, and I casually mentioned seeing someone in that abandoned lot. The older guy stopped immediately and pointed towards the back fence and said, "You saw him too, didn't you? Tall guy in clean clothes, doesn't talk." I didn't say anything and I didn't have to. He continued, "Yeah, he shows up every few months. My dad used to see him when he walked this neighborhood in the 70s. Same description and same spot, but he never stays long." I asked if he knew who the man was, and the old guy shrugged and said, "People say he died in that lot before the buildings got torn down. I think he just doesn't know he's dead." Then he walked away, like he'd said something completely ordinary. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know how a full-grown man can vanish from a silent, empty lot without making a single sound. I don't know why people have been seeing the same figure there for decades. All I know is he wasn't alive in the way we know. And every time I patrol that block at night, I avoid looking too long at the back fence, because I'm scared I'll see him again. And even more scared that I won't. I've been in law enforcement for 16 years here in Texas, and have seen more than my fair share of tragic, creepy, and downright unexplainable things on the job, from murder scenes to suicide calls to fatality accidents. Let me share with you one of my worst stories. My partner and I were dispatched to a burglary in progress at a local residence. The homeowner, who was visibly shaken, met us outside in the front yard crying. She believed someone was inside upstairs. We cleared the first floor and made our way up. As we moved room to room, we suddenly heard a muffling noise, like someone sliding across the wood floor. It was coming from the bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was locked, lights were off, and when we knocked, we heard a woman softly crying inside. We told her we were the police and she responded, "I'm scared. Someone's here." To reassure her, my partner put his badge on the ground and lit it up with his flashlight. A moment later, we heard the click of the lock. We opened the door, and the bathroom was completely empty. We checked every possible exit. Nothing, nobody. The house was cleared. Back at the police department, my partner ran a history check. The last call at that address was nearly a year ago to the day. A woman had passed away there on hospice. The current homeowner we'd met outside was her daughter. This experience and many others prompted me to start sharing stories like these from the job. I've been a patrol officer for a long time, long enough to watch Halloween morph into a completely different beast than the holiday I grew up with. Back then it was simple. Kids in flimsy masks, pillowcases dragging candy, and parents carrying flashlights and reminding everyone to look both ways. But now it's a full-tilt adult festival. Costumes so expensive they come with a payment plan. Bar crawls that run for miles. And house parties that decked out like someone hired a Hollywood set for a one-night event. Because of this, half of our calls end up involving people dressed like cartoon characters, horror icons, or superheroes who are in mid-meltdown. So anyway, a few years back I got dispatched to one of the calls that has never quite left me. It came in an automobile versus pedestrian collision on a state highway just outside the city limits. A dark stretch of asphalt with no streetlights or sidewalks, just a long ribbon of road where things go wrong fast. And it was the peak Halloween hour, the bars emptying out, drunken adults stumbling around, with enough alcohol in them to be confident that traffic couldn't hurt them. When I pulled up, the scene was already partially locked down. Cruisers were positioned to block the lane, their light pulsing across the pavement in harsh red and blue waves. A single car sat crooked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in slow, steady beats. Another officer was the driver, a middle-aged man shaking so violently his silhouette trembled. And that's when I saw the victim. He was lying in the middle of the highway, sprawled out like a discarded Halloween decoration. He was dressed in a bright pirate costume of cheap fabric and boots. For a brief moment my brain tried to interpret him as a prop, because everything about that costume clashed violently with the amount of blood pooling around him. It spread across the asphalt in an uneven, glittering sheet under the patrol light. And that surrealness made it land harder than most scenes I've worked. He had tried to sprint across the highway in the dark while drunk. The driver never had a chance. But the part that stuck with me wasn't the victim, it was the man behind the wheel. He'd been driving home from work completely sober, no priors, no speeding, and he told us he slowed slightly when he noticed movement near the median, but before he could react, the pedestrian darted right in front of him. He didn't even have time to hit the brakes. He kept repeating, voice crackling, "He came out of nowhere. I didn't have time, I swear I didn't." And then came the detail that made the entire scene feel like a fever dream. The driver was wearing a costume too. He'd come straight from an office Halloween event and hadn't bothered to change. So there he was, shaking uncontrollably, wearing a goofy superhero outfit, with a dead pirate in the road. It felt like reality had slipped sideways for a moment. Later that night, after the paperwork was finished, I sat in my patrol car in the station parking lot for a long time before going in. I just stared through the windshield, replaying the scene. I've had calls with far more violence, scenes that were objectively worse. But it was that mixture of absurdity and death that made it hard to forget about. Every Halloween since then, when the calls start piling up and the streets fill with drunk adults, I think about that night. How fast things can go sideways, and how fragile people really are. I work as an EMT for an ambulance company. EMS has always been full of superstitions, and most of us believe in the supernatural, on the account of all of the crazy, gruesome stuff we get to see on any given shift. Every company, every EMT, every firefighter has a story about a station that is haunted, or something that happened to them that can only be explained as paranormal. For the company I work at, we have about 5 stations, each with their own stories. Only 1 or 2 truly scary stories though, mostly things like employees seeing shadows out of the corner of their eyes, getting uneasy feelings in the stations, or hearing an unexplained knock, voice, or being hissed or growled at occasionally. The station I work at was no different. The station I work at is our main station, meaning that is where we keep all of our extra resupply. So it's not uncommon for various crews to be going in and out of the station at all hours of the day. It was common knowledge that the ambulance bay was creepy at night, and people report hearing voices, footsteps, or ambulance doors opening and closing out in the garage. Now, I've worked at this station for 2 years, and I've heard these things, but I've always been able to dismiss this as my partner doing something out in the bay, or another crew doing some late-night resupply. The only experience I've had there that I couldn't explain was I was distinctly growled at in the garage late one night. At the time, I quickly realized that the only person in that bay was me, and I certainly didn't growl at myself and quickly left. That was all I ever experienced there, and for the most part, I felt very comfortable at that station. until last night. The station is small and consists of a living room with a kitchenette attached to a hallway. This hallway leads to the garage on one side, the bathroom on the other, and at the end of the hallway is a door leading to the junior's bedroom, which you can then walk through to get to the senior's bedroom. If you go into the garage, there's a staircase that leads into the attack that stretches above the entire living quarters of the station. Me, Junior, and my partner, Senior, are dead asleep in our respective bedrooms, all the doors closed, when I'm awoken to these loud banging noises and the walls shaking. I realize that this banging isn't just banging, but actually running. Something huge, heavy, and fast is stomping and running around in the attack upstairs. It's stomping and running so loud it quite literally is shaking the walls. Whatever it was must have been huge to have been making sounds this loud. Then it gets faster. It's so fast it's running across the entire length of the attack. It's faster than anything can move. The stomping is happening one right after another. It almost sounded like there were 10 people up there, or a creature with too many legs running right above my head. Think of the luggage from Terry Pratchett books. So fast, too fast. I'm sitting upright in my bed now, huddled in the corner of the bedroom, absolutely horrified. I get this deep, visceral, primal feeling of dread, almost like what prey must feel like where they're being hunted. And suddenly, it's as if a thought from somewhere else is placed into my mind, and I know with every fiber of my being that it knows I'm awake, and that I know it's there. Like a sick, twisted version of that Spider-Man meme. In between the stomping and the running, I can hear barking, whirling. It's hard to describe, like a grunt mixed with the sound of wind. It is making the sound as it runs. I realize that it is moving so fast I can hear the wind it's creating swooshing and ripping around as it's grunting and running. So now I very silently get up and walk over to the senior bedroom door and try to open it, but it's locked. I feel as though I can't make a noise or it will come through into the station and kill me. I'm quietly knocking on the door. I'm crying, pleading for my partner to let me in. I'm thinking, this is so loud, there's no way she is asleep. But she is. She's out cold, and I don't get a reply. I decided that my partner had the right idea, and I crept over to the junior bedroom door, separating my bedroom door from the hallway that leads to the garage and the rest of the station, and locking the door. So, I silently creep back over to my corner in the bed with my blankets and begin to text her. It's 1:45, and I'm begging her to wake up over text and describe what I'm hearing. She isn't answering, so I text her fiancé and ask him to call her and wake her up, but he isn't answering either. It is at this point I decide to text my mum. As I'm sitting there, I get a familiar feeling, an intense dread. It doesn't even feel like my own thought, more like a piece of truth was just slipped into me by the universe. Whatever this thing is upstairs, it isn't human. I'm explaining to my mum what I'm hearing, all these loud swishing wind sounds and stomping and running. Then I hear it run down the stairs. When I tell you, my heart stopped and my soul left my body. When I heard it coming down the stairs, my stomach dropped to my arse and I was nauseous. I genuinely thought I was going to die. I was waiting for it to start pounding on the door, and I had never been more thankful in my life, because I thought I had locked it earlier. I was waiting for screaming, or for the door to start shaking or something, but it never came. It ran, impossibly fast and hard, back up the stairs, down the stairs, across the attack, down the attack, above my head in circles, down the stairs, up the stairs. It was going all over. Now, I'm absolutely hysterical on the phone with my mother. No one ever prepared me for dealing with being haunted by a taunting demon. And she's trying to calm me. She asks what she wants me to do, but I didn't know. I didn't know what she could do. I didn't know what to do. I just whisper, I don't know what to do. Just please don't hang up. She tells me to bang on my partner's door and wake her, and so I do. My partner wakes up and hears the rustling in her bedroom and goes, "Yeah," in a dismissive voice, and slowly walks over to the door and opens it. I literally shove her back into the room, whipped around faster than I've ever moved in my life, and closed the door and locked it. I explained to her everything I was hearing, and we went and sat on the bed. The activity was dying down now, but it was still active enough for her to hear the running upstairs too, at 2:45 a.m. Another crew that gets here at 3 got to our station to put their truck away and clock out to go home. Me and my partner huddled together, glued to each other's hip, hurried outside together to meet with them out in the building parking lot. And at this point, we realized that a completely separate crew from around 11 p.m. that night had not only left our truck full of medical equipment and drugs unlocked out in the parking lot, in an area known for not being so great, but also left our garage door open, literally giving just anyone access to our entire station. Me and my partner are terrified and aren't willing to go back into the station at this point. The crew that's getting off between 3 goes into the station to clock out, and when they come back, they see us hanging out in our truck. They joke with us for a minute over the ghost and make fun of us for sleeping in the truck for the rest of the shift. We ask them if they heard anything, and to which the senior on the crew, who has been there for a long time and staunchly believes in the supernatural, says, "Yeah, it definitely sounds like there's someone walking up there. But he's harmless." Me and my partner are just, "Harmless? That thing's not harmless." They left, and we decided to call PD to make sure it wasn't some crackhead that had gotten in through the garage door that had been left open. The police department got there and searched very thoroughly, and found no evidence of anyone being there. It was 4 a.m., and we notified our dispatch that the station was cleared to be safe by the police department, and together we ventured back inside. We elected to keep the truck in the parking lot, so we would have to go back into the garage if we got a call or needed to make a quick escape from the demon. And together, we huddled together into the living room with all the lights on until we got off at 7 a.m. I heard a few minor bumps and bangs, but nothing crazy. Things that could be dismissed as house noises and whatnot. But I barely slept, and I'm not looking forward to go back there later that week. A few days later, it wasn't as crazy as last time, but there was some activity during my day shift that I figured you'd like to hear. Most of the shift was perfectly fine. We were busy, and out of the station most of the day, and a couple of times throughout the night while we were in the station, though there was some tension. The air was thick with our own anxiety, and I'm sure this is what caused what I'm about to tell you. And for some context, out in the bay there is the cage. It's literally just a large metal cage that runs along the back of the garage, and it's where we keep all of our resupply. The door to the cage is supposed to be locked. This is to prevent crews from going in and messing up the company inventory. The only people with keys to the cage are the supervisors, who don't come in until 7. I was lying in bed half awake, half asleep, kind of just staring up at the ceiling when I heard what sounded like the cage door being intensely rattled by something. It didn't sound like someone was trying to open the door. It sounded like someone grabbed a hold of the door and just started violently shaking it. This went on for about a minute. I went to my partner's bedroom to see if she heard it and found that she slept right through it. We sat there for about half an hour listening to it, and nothing. It's 5:50, and I can hear distinct footsteps up in the attic. Nothing crazy like the insane marathon running from the other day, but quiet footsteps up there. My partner says she can't hear them, so I go back into my room. It's 6:30, and I can still hear an occasional footstep up there. And to be clear, no one goes up there because it's creepy and there's nothing up there, just some boxes and an extremely dark attic space. Because I was only hearing some footsteps, I decided to go out to the garage and investigate. When I get into the garage, the footsteps stop. There was no one in the garage. When I went over to the cage to try and recreate the noise I heard, I found that the door was open. I'm not totally convinced that it wasn't just a person opening the cage door, a bit aggressively. The only problem with this is I have no idea who it would be, because as I've said, there are only a few people who have a key to the cage and none of us are here, and they don't get here for a few hours. I went back inside, and I could again hear the footsteps upstairs, and now what sounded like in the garage. I tried to record the footsteps, but they were too faint to pick up on video. I also want to point out the crew we met outside the other day that was making fun of us for hanging out in the truck had made comments about he likes to resupply and slam the door cage, though I guess today he just wanted to rattle the door. I'm not convinced that what happened today was a ghost and not a person, but I'm not totally convinced it was a person and not a ghost either. I'd love to know if anyone can give me some insight into what the hell I'm dealing with. Is it a demon? Or something paranormal? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you have enjoyed, to the best of your ability, of course, these horrific and traumatizing stories. Police and the emergency service workers really do see the worst of it, don't they? I would like to remind you that if you can get 70% of my Patreon until Sunday night at the end of Sunday night, and I should be hitting you up with some Haunted Woods tomorrow. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much for tuning in. It really does mean the world that you listen, and I hope you enjoy them. Final thanks, as always, to members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support and contributions towards help keep everything running smoothly here. I also published some free Urbex stories over on Patreon, so if you'd like to watch that, you can follow the link to watch it for free on Patreon now. But that's it from me, guys. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.